Grab your favorite beverage. It's time for the Beers and Bruisers Fantasy Football Podcast.
Fantasy freaks and geeks, what is up? It is Thursday night of week 12. We got 7 NFC home games to get through here tonight. Got to make this final push to get into the playoffs. We're going to start with two NFC South showdowns. So we got the Buccaneers at the Falcons. Bucs getting 4 points on the road. It's a 51-point over-under. Very strange to me. Very strange game for the Bucs. They only ran the ball 6 times, and Cameron Brate saw 14 targets, the same as Mike Evans and Chris Godwin combined. Brate saw more targets last week than he had seen in the past 4 weeks combined. I'm not sure what the Bucs saw to make Brate such a big part of their game plan. The Saints allow the 11th fewest fantasy points to tight ends. They're middle of the pack in reception and receiving yards allowed to tight ends. Only two touchdowns allowed to the position all year. So kind of weird. Meanwhile, O.J. Howard didn't catch his only target. So maybe it wasn't necessarily a tight end thing, but more as a Cameron Brate thing. The Falcons rank 8th in the most fantasy points allowed to both quarterbacks and wide receivers, so I expect Mike Evans and Chris Godwin to get back on track. Mike Evans averaged 85 receiving yards in his 10 games versus the Falcons with 8 touchdowns, so he definitely likes to play the Falcons. And Jameis Winston has only thrown 5 interceptions in his 7 career games versus the Falcons, which is actually a pretty good number for him. For the Falcons, I think Brian Hill kind of blew his shot at earning the RB2 spot this week with Devontae Freeman out and Ito Smith both out. Hill averaged 2 yards per carry on 15 carries, and this was against the second worst run defense in the league in the Panthers. So he did not look good, and he only caught 1 of his 3 targets. 6 different Falcons had at least 1 rush attempt last week, so he wasn't the main guy whatsoever. And as a team, they only ran for 54 yards on 25 attempts, so the running game was not there at all. Ridley and Julio accounted for half of the targets last week, which is to be expected with no Austin Hooper. He's out again this week. I think they had Matt Ryan, or honestly, probably Matt Ryan and those 2 wide receivers are the only guys worth playing in this game. Although it is expected to be a high-scoring game. Like I said, it's a 51-point over-under right now. So they're expecting both teams to be able to put up points in this one. Real quick, getting back to the Bucs and Ronald Jones. So since Bruce Arians said that Ronald Jones deserves more touches after their Week 9 loss to the Seahawks, he's averaged under 3 yards per carry on 15 carries over those 2 games. He had a great day receiving the ball in Week 10, 8 for 8 with 77 yards, but he followed it up in a Week 11 by only catching 2 of his 4 targets for 1 yard. So I'm not going to trust him this week either. I think it's really just the wide receivers and the quarterbacks if you're stuck playing Jameis Winston. Next, we got the Panthers at the Saints. Panthers getting 8.5. The Saints' defense has been tough on running backs, the 3rd fewest points to the position, but McCaffrey has shown in multiple matchups that it doesn't matter if he's playing a top defense like he did. 100 rushing yards against the 49ers and the Titans, 2 of the best rushing defenses in the league. Although Greg Olsen averages 50 yards a game in his 14 career games versus New Orleans, and he is sitting at 48 yards a game so far this season, I'm sitting Greg Olsen this week. The Saints, the bottom 12 for fantasy points allowed to tight ends, so they've been better against tight ends over the second half of this season. DJ Moore getting 9 targets a game. That's and 11 targets a game in his last 5. It seems like Kyle Allen obviously likes him. I just traded for him in a full PPR league, and I'm really excited about it rest of season. Him and Curtis Samuels both have really good matchups going forward. I think the only somewhat good pass defense that they're going to face rest of season is the Colts. So for the Saints, Kamara and Latavius Murray should have a field day. The Panthers' run defense has been historically bad on the road this year. They've allowed on average 139 rushing yards per game in 5 road games, and they've given up 11 rushing touchdowns in those 5 road games. So these guys should see the ball a lot, and they should be able to do good things with it. Michael Thomas hasn't played like himself versus the Panthers. They're kind of his kryptonite, if you want to say that. In 6 career games, he does have 3 touchdowns, but he hasn't had a game with more than 7 catches, and only 1 of 6 games with over 80 yards, which is a pretty good stat line for most wide receivers. But for Michael Thomas, that's under his season averages of 9.5 catches a game and 114 yards per game. So maybe this might be one of his lower point games. He's been really good this year, but it seems like he's just not not himself against the Panthers. All right, we got the Giants at the Bears. This is a 40.5 point over-under. Giants getting 6.5. I think it's still up in the air about Mitchell Trubisky. He's questionable with a hip injury that caused him to leave early last week, and with him playing so bad this year, I'm going to assume that it's going to be Chase Daniels at quarterback, which should be good news for the running backs and Allen Robinson. In the 2 games that Daniels started, we saw Montgomery get 21 carries, Cohen 5, and 5 targets each against the Vikings. Then against the Raiders, Montgomery had 12 touches, and Cohen had 11. Also in those 2 games, Allen Robinson saw 16 targets. He led the team in targets in both games, so it seems like Daniels likes to throw to Allen Robinson and to these running backs. The Giants allow the 4th most explosive plays on defense, so this might be a good week to get Taylor Gabriel into your FanDuel lineups. He led his team in targets, catches, receiving yards, and air yards last week, and they're getting this Giants defense that can definitely get beat deep. So I'm throwing Taylor Gabriel into a couple lineups as a real nice cheap option. For the Giants, there's rumors going around that Saquon might be limited or possibly even shut down for the rest of the season. He's dealing with a lingering ankle injury and a shoulder injury, and with the Giants at 2-8 in a lost season, it doesn't really make sense for them to put him out there and risk him getting even more hurt. So I'd be concerned if I was a Saquon Barkley owner. I think you're obviously going to keep playing him because the upside for him to break 1 or 2 of those long 50, 60-yard touchdown runs is there all game, every game. So you're not going to sit him, but I think he might be limited to maybe 10, 12 touches. Plus, he hasn't really been playing all that well. 29 rushing yards on 27 carries in his last 2 games. So he's definitely not been as good as he was last year, and definitely not in the beginning of the season. A lot of dudes that are hurt for the Giants here. Evan Ingram is still questionable with a foot injury. He didn't practice Wednesday or Thursday. Sterling Shepard is still in concussion protocol, but is apparently trending in the right direction, so he might be able to play. And with the injury concerns to those 2 guys and Saquon, you got to figure that Golden Tate should be one of the best plays at wide receiver as far as volume goes. He should see plenty of targets, so I'm definitely going to play him if I got him at the end of my bench. Next, we got the Packers at the 49ers. So Packers coming off of a bye. They're getting 3 points on the road against this really good defense. It's a 46-point over-under. In the Packers' last game before their bye versus Carolina, they were really balanced. 13 carries each to the 2 running backs, 30 pass attempts for Aaron Rodgers. The 49ers' run D is really good. They've only allowed 3 rushing touchdowns all season, but at home they have allowed 4 guys to rush for at least 80 yards. One of them being Christian McCaffrey, who rushed for 117. So the other 3 were Nick Chubb, Adrian Peterson, and Chris Carson. I'm not crazy about Aaron Jones this week because it took the 4 of those running backs on average 18 attempts to hit that 80-yard mark. And Aaron Jones has only had 2 games with over 13 carries, and one of them was against Dallas when Jamal Williams was out. So I just don't see Green Bay giving him that much workload. I think they're going to want to stay balanced. Only 3 running backs have over 15 carries versus the 49ers all season, which were those 3 running backs that I mentioned. So I don't think he's going to get the work, which means I don't think he's going to hit that 80-yard mark. So I don't know if he's going to be all that good of a play this week. So because of that, I think the Packers are going to have to throw the ball more, which means Aaron Rodgers should be pretty good. He averages over 320 yards a game in his 6 career games against the 49ers. His last game versus the 49ers, which was last year, he threw for 425 yards and 2 touchdowns. So I think Aaron Rodgers maybe gets up a little bit to play the 49ers. They did pass on him for Aaron Rodgers, or for Alex Smith back in 2005. Rodgers was born in California. He went to college in California. He definitely wanted to play for the 49ers, so I think he might be feeling a little bit of revenge. So I'm digging Aaron Rodgers this week for sure. All right, Seahawks at the Eagles. Seahawks getting 2 points, 48-point over-under. Seahawks coming off of a bye. The Eagles' run D is really good. They held the Patriots, the Bears, and the Bills to under 100 total team rushing yards in the last 3 games. They did that in the first 5 games of the season as well. Really, only 2 teams have been successful running on Philadelphia, and that's Dallas and Minnesota. Only 3 running backs have gotten 16 or more carries versus the Eagles. That's Dalvin Cook, Ezekiel Elliott, and Kerryon Johnson. And this week the Eagles get Chris Carson, who averages 20 carries a game. So if the Seahawks can stick to the run, and if their defense can play good enough and keep the score down, I think we can see Chris Carson have a good enough game. So I'm not sitting him against this really tough Philly run defense. He's also averaging 3.5 targets a game, which should go up a little bit in this game, with the Eagles tied at 8th in most receptions allowed to running backs. Tyler Lockett is questionable with a shin injury. He was limited in practice Wednesday and Thursday, but apparently him and Pete Carroll both said that they expect him to play. The Seahawks wide receivers have really good matchups in this game, with the Eagles allowing the 4th most fantasy points to wide receivers. So Tyler Lockett's going to be a great play if he plays, and whether he does or not, I think DK Metcalf should be pretty good too. He's had either 9 or 10 targets in 3 of his last 4 games, and he's had 3 touchdowns in those 4 games. Also, Jacob Hollister has come on. He should be an okay tight end option this week. 10 targets in the last 2 in last week's game, or I'm sorry, in the Seahawks' last game, and 3 touchdowns in the last 2 games. So you got Travis Kelce and Hunter Henry on bye this week. I don't know about you guys, but when I have one of these 2 tight ends, I don't roster a second tight end, so definitely going to have to find somebody to replace those 2 guys with, and maybe he's the one. The best tight end matchup, though, this week has to go to the Eagles. The Eagles cannot have asked for a better matchup offensively. The Seahawks allow the 5th most fantasy points to tight ends. And with all the injuries that the Eagles are dealing with Deshaun Jackson, Alshon Jeffrey, Jordan Howard, last week Carson Wentz, they're gonna need Ertz and Goddard to have really good games like they did last week. Ertz with 11 targets, 94 yards last week. Goddard with 6 targets and a touchdown. They played 81% of the snaps and 81% of the snaps between the 2 of them, so they were on the field a lot, and they're definitely going to need him again this week. Carson Wentz needs to be a little more accurate. He had 8 of his passes defensed, and he only completed 50% of his passes. The group of backup Eagle wide receivers that's playing right now, J.J. Arcega-Whiteside, Jordan Matthews, Matt Collins, they only caught 2 of their 8 combined targets, and Nelson Aguilar only caught 4 of his 9 targets. But Aguilar and Goddard were the only 2 guys charged with a drop last week. So Wentz definitely needs to be more accurate. He needs to help these guys out. He needs to put the ball in better spots for them to be able to catch it and make plays. So I'm not going to put everything on all these backup wide receivers. Wentz has to step up a little bit too, with what is looking like a really bad rush attack. It's going to be Miles Sanders, Boston Scott again, unless J.J. is ready, unless Jordan Howard ends up playing. So passing game's got to step up for the Eagles if they want if they want to get out of 500 and get their 6th win. Next, we got the Lions at the Redskins. It's Lions getting 3.5, and it's a 42.5 point over/under. So Vegas is expecting a low scoring game here. So with the Lions, definitely the darling of the waiver wire this week was Bo Scarborough. He got 14 carries in last week's game in his first game as a Lion. The Redskins have given up the 6th most rushing yards this year and the 7th most fantasy points to running backs, so Bo should be a decent play. I would expect him to get 14, 15 carries at least again like he did last week. He scored a touchdown, didn't look bad at all, and they don't want Jeff Driscoll to go out there and throw the ball 40 times, so in 2 games with Jeff Driscoll now, Kenny Golladay and Marvin Jones have seen a slight downtick in their yards and catches, but they've both scored now at least once with him, so I think they should be fine in this game. For the Redskins, the Lions' defense is really bad. They're among the league leaders in fantasy points allowed to all 4 of the positions. They give up the most fantasy points to running backs, and with Adrian Peterson dealing with a toe injury right now, Darius Geis should be a pretty good play this week. The new head coach there, Bill Callahan, loves to run the ball, and I'm sure the Redskins have pressured him and said, hey, going forward, we want to see what we have in Geis. So I really like him as a cheap FanDuel play this week, $5,400, which is dirt cheap for a running back that could easily see 18 to 20 touches in what is the best matchup for running backs. I also have him in one of my standard leagues, and I'm contemplating starting him, but right now he's sitting on my bench. I have a couple pretty good running backs in that league, so I don't think I'm going to make that move, but if I was hurting at running back, I wouldn't have a problem throwing him into my starting lineup. Even though Terry McLaurin also has a really good matchup, he's just I'm not playing him. Only 10 targets in the last 2 games with Dwayne Haskins. I think the Redskins just want to run the hell out of the ball. I think they want to limit Haskins' throws and keep him down and keep him comfortable and keep the ball moving with the running back. So I'm staying away from everybody in this game except for Darius Geis. All right, last game of the week here. We got the Ravens at the Rams, 46.5 point over/under. Ravens -3 on the road. Mark Ingram with his 3rd multi-touchdown game of the year last week. The Ravens had another dominant game, scoring 41 points in just the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th quarter. And they held the high-powered Texans offense to just 7 points, which didn't come until the 7-minute mark of the 4th quarter. So they were shutting them out almost the whole game. Lamar Jackson with 7 touchdown passes in his last 2 games on only 32 completions. 7 games in a row with over 60 rushing yards. 5th game with 70 or more rushing yards. He's just kind of dominating it right now. He's killing everybody that he faces. Looking back at the stats for this game, I saw that Gus Edwards had 112 yards with 8 carries, and I thought, oh man, maybe hopefully they're not getting away from Mark Ingram, getting late in the season. But he had 5 of his 8 carries came in the second half, including his 65-yard TD run with 4 minutes left in the game, which was half of his yardage. So I'm not worried about him stealing too many meaningful touches from Mark Ingram. I'm sure going forward, once we get into late November, early December games, that they will start to limit Mark Ingram's carries, especially with Gus Edwards showing that he can carry the load. He looked really good last year. I was kind of surprised to see that he didn't kind of earn that starting role going into this year, but Mark Ingram has been absolutely phenomenal for the Ravens. He's been a great pickup for him. The Rams rank middle of the pack in all tight end categories, but they've really only faced 3 good tight ends, and that was Will Dissly, George Kittle, and Austin Hooper. All 3 of them, plus Tyler Eifert, had double-digit days in fantasy points against the Rams, so I expect Mark Andrews to continue being a top 3 tight end against this team. I think he's going to hopefully get me another touchdown. I got him in 2 of my leagues. In one of them, it's a standard scoring league, and I think it was week 5 or week 6. Maybe it was their bye. Someone dropped him. In that league, I was kind of struggling at tight end, and he has been awesome for me. I'm in first place, and he's definitely one of my best players, so I couldn't believe that. Gurley had his biggest workload last week versus the Bears, his first game with over 18 carries, his first game with over 101 total yards. Maybe the Rams have been just trying to keep him fresh for this playoff push here. The Rams will need him to keep Lamar Jackson and Mark Ingram and all those guys off the field, so maybe we see another big workload game for Todd Gurley. Cooper Kupp only one touchdown in his last 5 games, and it was in his 200-plus yard game against the Bengals. The other 4 games, under 55 receiving yards. One of them was that dud that he put up. So he's taken a big step back since the beginning of the season. I have him in a standard league, and I'm stuck playing either him or Deebo Samuels in my flex this week with Marlon Mack hurt and with Dalvin Cook out. So that's going to be a tough decision for me. The Ravens are tied for third in fewest touchdowns allowed to wide receivers, and with Robert Woods still looking for his first touchdown of the season, I don't think this is the week that he gets it. And it's still up in the air whether or not Brandon Cooks is going to play. He's still dealing with the concussion that's kept him out for the past few weeks. So that's going to do it for the Rams and the Ravens, and that's going to do it for the NFC Home Games here in Week 12. Thanks for tuning in. Make sure you check us out next week, Week 13, what is a lot of leagues, the last week of the season. So we'll be getting into all the games. There's no more teams on bye, so make sure you tune in. And as always, may the fantasy gods be cruel to your opponents.
You have been listening to the Beers and Bruisers Fantasy Football Podcast. For more episodes and information, follow us on social media and tune in every week. Beers and Bruisers is available on Google Podcasts, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Spotify, Alexa, Reach TV, or your favorite podcast service. Beers and Bruisers is a proud member of the HC Universal Network family of podcasts. To find out more about this and other great shows on our network, visit us online at hcuniversalnetwork.com or download the free HC Universal Network app today. Fantasy football is fun, but gambling addiction destroys lives. If you or someone you love suffers from gambling addiction, please do not be afraid to seek help. The National Council on Problem Gaming operates a national problem gambling helpline network. Contact them today at 1-800-522-4700. Thank you for tuning in to the Beers and Bruisers Fantasy Football Podcast. Please remember to drink responsibly and always look for your man downfield.